Well, brethren, happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, a very special Chag Sameach, because today's weekly Sabbath is not only the weekly Sabbath, it is also the annual Sabbath of the last great day. And a big welcome to everyone who's here with us today. Let's take a look at the date on the calendar, see exactly where we are. And this is, as last night, it's the 21st day of the first month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's been that date since sunset last night. And yet on the Roman calendar, after midnight last night, it became Saturday, and it's the 19th day of April, the 19th day of April on the pagan Roman calendar, a calendar that will be a thing of the past once Jesus Christ returns to this earth and sets up and restores God's kingdom on this earth. And along with that, he'll be ousting the one who excuse me, he'll be ousting the one who puts a lot of temptation in front of us, brethren, that we have to overcome and put out sin from our lives, as we have put out the leavening of leavened bread this week during the days of unleavened bread. Today is the last day of the day of unleavened bread. We'll cover some important things about that. We'll have a couple of sermons and sermon excerpts from God's end-time apostle in today's service, and because of that and a lot of that, let's get things started where we sing a hymn before God. You have an opportunity to be involved in today's service. And for those of you that are listening for the first time to our services, maybe you stumbled on it or you got an invitation from me to tune in and you're here, you'll notice, among other things, not only is God's truth different from what you'll hear in mainstream religion today, and those that are in mainstream religion are part of what I refer to as a fall harvest, where God's got those people preserved for something colossal, big, and special at another time. And then there's the spring harvest, the few God has, and there are the few God has called to the spring harvest. And if God is calling you to that, and you're interested and yet scratching your head, as many of us did as God first called us, about how come things are so different. And sometimes that's part of the calling, to recognize there's a big difference between God's truth and what's in His Word, the Bible, and what you hear these preachers and people say from the world's religion. Let's in appreciation for the truth, let's start this last day of unleavened bread service off with a hymn from Psalm 81. Brethren, let's sing together. I'm sorry. I hit a button that took the calendar off the screen, but let's switch over to the Bible hymnal that we're going to sing from Psalm 81. Praise the Eternal with a psalm. Everybody's together, verse 1. Praise the Lord with a psalm, sing to the God of Jacob. Praise the chorus, make a joyful noise, bring out the harp and timbrel, blow on the trumpet, sound the drum. Statutes and the law which God has ordained for Israel. Hear, O my people, hear my voice. I will admonish Israel. You shall have no other foreign God. I am the God who freed you. When you were troubled, you did call. I delivered Israel. God answered in the secret place. With laughter He did command them. I am the God who brought you out from the land of Egypt. Hear, O Israel, Brethren, thank you to all of you who sang along on that first hymn.
Right,
We'll be
thank you,
singing
everyone.
another hymn a little later in the service this morning. And thank you to some of you who've already responded to the fact that this is an annual Sabbath, the last day of unleavened bread. We'll be going through the scriptures from Leviticus 23 on that in just a moment. But to be sure we know where we are, let's just take a look at this calendar again. And I want to thank Mr. D. Now, he prefers to stay very private, doesn't even like me to say his first name. So I'm going to honor that unless he tells me otherwise later that, Stephen, it's okay. You can acknowledge me by name. But I'm going to call him Mr. D, D meaning dependable, very dependable brother in God's church, who reminded me last night as I was saying, well, why we got that yellow on the Sabbath, half of the Sabbath for today? And he reminded me what we were doing on that. It's there. I think this was his idea, a good one, that since today is a double Sabbath in the sense that it's not only a weekly Sabbath, it is also an annual Sabbath. And on those days when the weekly Sabbath is also an annual Sabbath, Mr. D puts half of the Sabbath in yellow with a diagonal slice through the Sabbath. So half of it's yellow, half of it's purple, meaning it's on those days that yellow means it's a weekly Sabbath as well as an annual Sabbath. Just so we know exactly where we are. Today is a weekly Sabbath, and it is an annual Sabbath occurring at the same time. And it works out. It's different from year to year depending on what day of the week Passover occurs on in that particular given year. This year, Passover was also on a weekly Sabbath. 1 week ago from today, it was Passover, and the following day, the first day of the week, was the first day of unleavened bread, and there's 7 days of unleavened bread. We're going to look at that fact in Scripture, in fact, right now. So you see where we are. And this not only is the last day of unleavened bread today, it is the last day of the first week of 7 weeks that we count that must be complete before we number the morrow after the seventh Sabbath as number 50, Pentecost. You know, Pentecost, the Greek words for Pentecost mean 50 count. Penta, 50, cost, count, or you say it the other way, count 50, cost. How would that be? Pentecost, cost to penta. 50 count. It's a 50-day count to Pentecost. And day number 50, not day 51. It's not 50 days must be complete, and then we number the next day 51 as Pentecost. It clearly says, we'll see that in just a moment in the Scriptures. Let's put the Scriptures on the screen, that when we get to verse 15 of Leviticus 23, we'll see that 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks of first day of the week through Sabbath weeks must be complete. And after 7 of those are complete, then we number the day after the 7th Sabbath as 50, Pentecost. But right now we're focusing in on where we are today. We're on the last day of those 7 days of unleavened bread. And so after today, as of sunset tonight, you can go back to filling up your house full of leaven if you want to. Bring in plenty of baking soda to be able to cook things with and clean with. Even some people like to brush their teeth with some baking soda, and that can help whiten up your teeth. And some people clean their bathtubs or their toilets or their floors with baking soda because it's a good cleaning agent as well. But it is leavening. We did have to put it out of our homes during these 7 days. Now, if you didn't do that, you better go throw that last box of baking soda you have out before sunset tonight and show God you mean business about obeying Him and keeping His way. Let's take a look at it. Beginning in verse 6 of Leviticus 23, and on the 15th day of the same month, now if we go back one verse to see that same month that God is referring to through the instruction written by Moses here in Leviticus, we see that Passover in the 14th day of the first month, at evening is the Lord's Passover. So the context of the next verse 6 is from the 14th, just one day later, of the first month. So when he says on the 15th of the same month, he's just said the same month he's talking about is the first month on God's sacred calendar. And that's where we are right now. First month, 15th day, a week at the beginning of this week, first day of the week, Sunday this week was the 15th of the first month, is the feast of unleavened bread unto the eternal Lord your God. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Hopefully all of you had some unleavened bread you were able to eat a little bit of every day during this feast, and including today. Today's the last day of it. Let's see, 7 days. Today is the 7th day. You must eat unleavened bread. And verse 7 says, and the first day, as we did on the first day of this feast, which happened to be the first day of the week, also of this week, we had an holy convocation online here by live stream, an holy convocation, and you shall do no servile work therein. It's a holy day. You don't work on that day. You have a holy convocation, and you bring an offering. You shall offer an offering. And then and it emphasizes you shall do no servile work on that day. It's a rest day, an annual Sabbath day. That's the first day, but so is, we do it 7 days. On it even in this verse 8, it even says it here, in the 7th day. The 7th day of unleavened bread is an holy convocation. So not only, brethren, are we doing the weekly Sabbath today, this is also the annual Sabbath, and a holy convocation for the annual Sabbath of this 7th day of unleavened bread. And verse 9 says, well, let's see what happens after this verse. Okay, it starts to talk about how from the wave sheaf day, which was also the first day of unleavened bread this year, this particular year, that began the 49-day count for the 7 weeks that must be complete, and then we number the morrow after day 49, after the 7 weeks, we number that next day as 50 and keep Pentecost on that day. But in this verse 8, we see that the 7th day is an holy convocation. We do no servile work. And just like the first day, God's end-time apostle said it, that since we bring offerings on the holy days, we come before the eternal God today without an offering. Some of you, even before the service, up in Canada, I won't mention your names, not to be embarrassing, but to say thank you for those who hook up. We got a direct wire hookup. All right, it's gone back to 100% now. Let me see if I can figure out why. We had a little interruption of a yellow light. That could just simply be the internet service provider themselves having a temporary problem that caused us to have a weak signal just for a few moments. Of course, the devil loves to interfere with things of God, and the devil hates this ministry, and he hates the fact that this ministry preaches as we were taught 100%, completely, without compromise on the truths that God gave us through his end-time most faithful servant and apostle, Herbert Armstrong. Some people hate that. Some people hate that we do that. And now I changed the slide as I show Mr. Armstrong's picture because I actually gave up that post office box. We don't really need it. And I had the video I'm playing this morning, we actually had the old post office box that we used to use in Bessemer, which was the same as the post office box number Mr. Armstrong used to use in Pasadena for a long time, 111. But the cost of that, I don't think is worth it. It's somewhat over $100, almost $200 at that particular post office every 6 months. So that's quite an expense that I said, you know what, for the vanity of that, and that's purely all it was, and the trouble of having to drive to the post office, which I don't go to every day, I said, I'm going to let this post office box go. We can operate from, I've got 2 properties here. We can operate if somebody needs to mail to me. We can operate from the property that I've designated to the Church of God television ministry. The property is even in that name, and until we put a building on there, we actually have to pay taxes that I don't have to pay on the other property. But for certain reasons. But I gave up that P.O. box. So if anybody were going to use that, please use our street address as well when it comes to the offering that Deuteronomy 16:16 informed us. And Mr. D, thank you for sending me that graphic that I was referring to that explains how. I'm actually not going to pop it up. I'm going to be real quick this morning. That explains how 3 times in a year, I will use it next holy day, 3 times in a year shall all the males appear before the eternal Lord your God in the place he shall choose. Mr. Armstrong has explained that in those 3 times there are 7 holy days. So there's not a contradiction in the doctrine Mr. Armstrong gave us, the teaching, the instruction, the doctrine of the church, that we follow God's word about coming before him with an offering on each holy day. There are 7 holy days. We give an offering on each one of them. And that does not contradict or conflict with this instruction in Deuteronomy 16:16 that 3 times, and the word would be better translated, as Mr. Armstrong explained, as seasons. 3 seasons in a year. And during those seasons or times, in one of them there's 4 holy days in one of those seasons. In another season there's 2 holy days. And in the third season there is only 1 holy day that season. But when you add up all the holy days in the 3 seasons, there are 7 holy days in the seasons. So if you expanded this verse without contradicting it, you'd say, on 7 holy days during the 3 times in a year that we have holy days, shall all the males appear before the eternal Lord your God in the place he shall choose. Now, during this time of scattering, the place God has chosen through and inspired this ministry for you is through this live stream. Wherever you are, we're scattered. When you're here on the live stream, you have assembled before God on this holy day. But in the place he shall choose, and next God is going to name those 3 seasons, and we'll count the holy days within each season. The first one is in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And brethren, how many holy days are there within the Feast of Unleavened Bread itself? The one Feast of Unleavened Bread. The verse splits between two screens, so I'm flipping it to the second part so you can see the word bread. But in that Feast of Unleavened Bread, toward the last lines of this part of the verse on the screen, we have what? How many holy days do we have during the Feast of Unleavened Bread? 2, correct? The first day is a feast. The last day is a holy day. The first day is a holy day. The last day of the feast is a holy day. There's 5 other feast days during the feast that are not holy days. But we got 2 holy days within the Feast of Tabernacles. Next season that God names in this verse 16 of Deuteronomy 16 is in the Feast of Weeks. All right, in the Feast of Weeks, how many weeks do we have that we're counting off? It's 7, right? 7 weeks must be complete. We'll see that in verse 23 of Leviticus 23 in just a moment. We'll flip back to that. In the Feast of Weeks, it culminates with 1 holy day, day 50, Pentecost. So there's 1 holy day during the Feast of Weeks. So now we've got a total of 3 holy days in those first 2 seasons or times of the 3 times. Now, we make up the 7 holy days during the last of these 3 times, which God refers to here in this part of the verse as, and in the Feast of Tabernacles. In that season, the Feast of Tabernacles season or time, there are how many holy days, brethren? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement. Number 3 is the first day of not unleavened, but the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles itself. And the last great day. That's number 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We have trumpets, atonement, tabernacles, first day, and last great day, the 8th day of the feast. So we have 4 holy days during that last season, that third season, that third time, the Feast of Tabernacles season. So we add those up. We have 2 holy days during the Feast of Unleavened Bread season, I was trying to get that scripture to go back there where it's got the words Feast of Unleavened Bread. 2 holy days there, 1 holy day during the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. That's 3 so far. And add the 4 of the 4 holy days of the Feast of Tabernacles. That's a total of 7 holy days during those 3 times, right? Okay, but what is it saying here? 3 times in the year shall all the males appear before the eternal Lord your God in the place he shall choose, and he names those 3 times or seasons. And then in verse 17, God instructs us something I have to remind you of on this day, on a holy day, on an annual holy day. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the eternal Lord your God, which he's given you. So there are the 2 conditions, brethren, as you determine how much you're going to give back to God. And you choose this. There's not a percentage set on your offering that you bring before God today, but there are 2 conditions that you should be intelligently and wisely yourself considering, prayerfully, cheerfully before God. And somebody sent me those guys in New York did a great job. They sent me those 2 scriptures that explain how we should be giving to God cheerfully. Maybe I can pull those verses up for you by the end of the service. I want to get us to Mr. Armstrong, so I'm just going to say this quickly. Your 2 conditions God gives us are that you're to give as you're able. That means don't pull out your credit card and say, I'm going to give God I've got so much credit on this card, I'm going to give God a really great offering. And you charge up something you're going to struggle to have to pay for. That's not giving as you're able. That's going beyond what you're really able and creating debt for you that God doesn't like to see you strangle yourself with. So give as you're able. And then the second part of this condition is according to the blessing of the eternal Lord your God, which he's given you. Look back during the last year and see what God's given you. And acknowledge that before him. Thank him and say, God, of that blessing you gave me, here's out of my heart what I'm going to give back to you as an offering for the ministry that you've commissioned on this earth, which some of you recognize is best being done right here through yours truly, the ministry of Jesus Christ through Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, trained under God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, who I had a good number of years to get to know on a first-hand, face-to-face, personal basis, and receive the instruction that many other Ambassador College students and people at headquarters received from God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong. I share that with you weekly and annually on the annual Sabbaths and without compromise. And that's one of the conditions for determining during a time of scattering where to put your tithes and offerings, and find a ministry that's preaching the truth of God without compromise. And those of you that have carefully checked it, I think you can see we do it here, not only without compromise, but without exception. We don't leave out the little things that God gave us through Mr. Armstrong, that he would pound that lectern, and including makeup. Women. And I know that offends some, and we might even lose some potential new people that say, well, I just can't give up my makeup. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the women who grew up in the church and continue to attend Sabbath services here or there or someplace, they don't like to attend here. They don't like me playing Mr. Armstrong's sermons. They like to think, oh, Mr. Armstrong gave that up before he died. No, he didn't. But we continue to preach it even though it steps on some toes. But brethren, this is the day, a day, as God said here, it's one of those 3 seasons, one of the 7 holy days that we appear before the eternal Lord our God in the place he shall choose, and we appear not empty, with every man giving as he's able, according to the blessing of the Lord. Now let's go back to Leviticus 23 for a moment, and we're going to get to verse 15 real quick before we go to Mr. Armstrong's one of 2 sermons we're going to play from him today. On the 15th day and the last day, the 7th day, all 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And then we covered the scripture that says the first day and the last day we're to do no servile work. on the first day and the last day, we can see here in verse 8, the seventh day and the first day are holy days, holy convocations, no servile work, and we bring an offering. And let's go just a little further. During these days of unleavened bread, on the day of the wave sheaf offering, that begins the count of 7 weeks that must be complete. We're going to see that wording in a moment. God spoke to Moses in verse 9, saying, "Say to the children of Israel," in verse 10, "that when you come into the land, the promised land that I give you, and shall reap the harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the feast." This is the instruction, one of the instructions for the wave sheaf day, as we abbreviate it in reference to it. Verse 11, "And ye shall wave the sheaf before the eternal Lord your God, to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." And we came to understand, hey, this is Shabbat, after the Shabbat, the weekly Sabbath. On the morrow after the weekly Sabbath, during the Passover week, according to God's very specific instruction through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong, explaining this to us and making it a doctrine in the church, on the morrow after the weekly Sabbath of the Passover week, the priest shall wave it. We know that from Joshua 5. I've gone through that before. We're not going to take the time to do that today. We did that in pre-instruction before this last great day. Showed how Joshua 5, verses 10 through 12, show that ancient Israel went into the promised land on a weekly Sabbath, and the very next day they did the wave sheaf offering. They can only do that in a year when Passover occurs on a weekly Sabbath. So we showed you how that works, how the counting from God's calendar on when the wave sheaf days, the day after Passover was on a weekly Sabbath that year. And verse 12, "And you shall offer that day when you wave the sheaf." Here's what the Levitical priesthood that is no longer operative. We're now under the Melchizedek priesthood. They actually would take a lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering. Now, since the Melchizedek priesthood is back in operation, since Christ came and he was that lamb, we just acknowledge and recognize the wave sheaf day that he waved after his resurrection. He was the wave sheaf offering. And we do acknowledge and honor that day. We begin the count of the 7 weeks that must be complete on the wave sheaf day, including that day in the count. And verse 13, the meat offering, this is more of the Levitical ritual part of the Levitical priesthood, that we don't do this explicit part here today, because Melchizedek did replace that with the Melchizedek priesthood. But we do this. This is part of the overall instruction in priesthood under Melchizedek. "And you shall eat neither bread nor parched corn nor green ears." Well, coming into the land, we couldn't eat the fruit of the land until we did the wave sheaf offering. And this is actually in principle telling us something. "It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your lands." And verse 15, "You shall count." Now, here's how to count it. And here's how many days must be complete before we number the day after the seventh Sabbath as number 50. "You shall count unto you," this should say beginning with. If you keep the grammar the same as the Hebrew language, this would not say from in English, because from means exclude the day, and that violates the grammar of the original Hebrew. So the King James translators, they violated the transliteration rules by putting the preposition from here that is not in the original Hebrew language. And by having selected the word from, they went further. Not only is the word from not in the original language, but by using that word and instead of some words like beginning with, they violated the syntax of the Hebrew grammar. Because the Hebrew grammar says you begin the count of 7 weeks that must be complete. You begin it including the morrow after the Sabbath, including the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, not counting from it, which would exclude it according to English grammar. So that's all I'll say on that. Seven Sabbaths. At the end of this verse, it says, last two lines, it says, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. It does not say, as Thomas Cranmer put a mistranslation in Acts 2 of God's Word that says 50 days must be complete. That wording is not in God's original words, either in Hebrew nor Greek. Here's the criteria in Leviticus 23:15, and you cannot have anything else in Scripture conflicting with this. So his adding that to Acts 2 was strictly a Thomas Cranmer thing that was part of what helped him get his head cut off by the Queen of England. It's not 50 days must be complete. 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. How many days are in 7 weeks of first day of the week through seventh-day Sabbath weeks? Count them, 7 per week, that's 49. 7 times 7 is 49, not 50. But here's where we get to 50 in the next verse. Even to the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, after the 49 days. After that 7th Sabbath shall you number the next day 50. Shall you number 50 days. The morrow after the 7th Sabbath you number as 50. And you shall offer the holy day offering on that day 50, not on day 51. All right, so I think we've clarified that. We'll talk more during the weeks ahead of us on the Sabbath about how and why we're counting to June 1st as the Pentecost day that comes up. That's the next holy day after today. But the point is, brethren, you bring your holy day offering today, and if you have determined already, or determine as we go with the moment, that, hey, Stephen, like God instructed us through Mr. Armstrong to give our offering to a ministry that preaches without compromise today during these days we're scattered, you can do that either by mail, and our address is on our website, on the contact page on our website at cogtv.org. You can get to cogtv.org by typing in sabbath.tv. That'll take you to cogtv.org. And or you can do it online, which is the way a lot of people like to do it. And we have on our webpage at cogtv.org, sabbath.tv, we have a menu item up near the top right side of the screen in the menu column there. There's a button called Holy Day Offering. If you press that button, it'll take you to a secure PayPal page. You can enter the amount of your offering and hit the button. And if you're not a member of PayPal already, you don't even have to be. You can just put in your debit card, credit card information and put in the amount. They keep that secure. They don't send us your debit card information. They just send it after they subtract a very small administration fee from it. They send us the offering to our church banking account, and you can take care of your offering that way, either online from cogtv.org, our Holy Day Offering button, or by mailing it to the address that you'll find on another menu button. The Contact Us page has our mailing address, 1450 Virginia Road, Bessemer, Alabama, 35023. And if you didn't get that down, no problem. Just look at the Contact Us page and you can find it there. All right, that's all I'm going to say about that. We want to go now to God's end time apostle with a sermon that he gave the evening before the last day of Unleavened Bread. And while he was alive, I think the year on this was what, 1978. Okay, this was at a feast, but it relates to today very much. And we're going to have another sermon from him if we can get this one going right away. We'll have another sermon from God's end time apostle following this one. All right, and for some reason, I just started it and it didn't. Oh, okay, we got it. How come we didn't hear the volume? Hang on a moment, I'll make sure we get the volume going. Let's see what's happening. Audio should come up in just a moment, brother. Stand by, please.
We can't solve our problems. Man can almost perform miracles. He's made rivers run backward. And still, we can't solve our problems. We have not learned how to live with one another. Nations cannot get along or live with one another. Nations, the governments of nations are being overthrown at the rate of one a month and have been for the last 2, 3, 4 years. And you know, it just doesn't make sense. You live in a world not only of science and of education, philosophy, technology, and all of that, but you live also in a world filled with religious confusion. We have in this world, for example, Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Taoism, Muslim religion, and the Christian religion. Now, the Christian religion is the largest, believe it or not, and in the Christian religion there are 250 denominations and sects in the United States alone, beside many small groups and smaller sects. But more or less larger denominations, 250 in the United States alone. And they certainly don't all speak the same thing. Why do we have this kind of confusion? Why do we have this kind of trouble in the world? It's time someone comes up with the answer. And I will be very frank in saying I cannot understand why so many people are not concerned at all. They're not concerned about why they had to happen to be on the earth. How did we get here? Were we put here and put here for a purpose, or did we just happen? Where are we going, and what is the way, and why haven't we found it? Why do we have violence, crime, families breaking up in divorce, home life broken up, and we don't know how to live? And if we want to get at the answers to things like that, the other average person says, don't bother me with that. I want to see this football game on television. Or I want to go to the dance tonight. I want to enjoy myself. It's like a man that's in a dream. He's asleep and someone wakes him up. And he says, don't wake me up. Don't wake me up. Go away. And I guess that's just about it. We are asleep. And we don't want to be awakened for some reason. Why should there be all this religious confusion? I want to speak a little about that in this program. Religion is generally defined as the worship of the Creator or of the supernatural. Now, of course, you might say that religion is the entire antithesis of that. In Russia, we have atheism and the belief that all religion is wrong anyway, the opium of the people. And yet, of all of these religions, and of all of the denominations and sects and groups in Christianity, there is only one original true church, which is not a large church, but a small and persecuted church, and the only one on the face of the earth that can answer these questions. I ask you, does that make sense? The people are not interested in a thing like that, and they're not. You know that of all of the religions, including Christianity and all of its sects and denominations except the one original true church, not one of them knows who or what God is. And yet, religion is the worship of God. It's like the Apostle Paul, who was taken up to Mars Hill, the court of Areopagus, the Greek scholars way back in his day, in the first century. And they were so scholarly, and yet they knew so little. And they sort of mocked Paul as he came up. They looked on him as an ignorant something. He didn't have the polish, the education of the something they did. He probably had a lot more. But They said, well, we're always looking for some new thing. Now, we understand you have a kind of a strange religion. And it's funny, but the truth seems strange to most people because they never heard it before. And they don't understand what it is. And so it does seem strange to them. Paul said, well, I have observed that you are too ignorant. Absolutely ignorant. Religion is the worship of God. And yet as I came along, I saw on one of your idols you worship a sign saying to the unknown God. You worship a God, but you have no idea who that God is. You don't know who you're worshiping. You are superstitious of all people. He says, I'll tell you who God is, God that made the worlds and all that exists. Everything you see up in the sky, this earth, everything in it, all people. And he said, made human beings to all breathe the same breath, and he gives us all the same breath. God is the creator, but none except the one original church that Jesus Christ founded, as I said, knows who and what he is.
Herbert W. Armstrong will return right after this message.
I have shown you the beginning of God. We find the very prehistoric beginning in the New Testament, in the book of John, first chapter and the first verse. In the beginning was the Word. Now the word, and it is the capital W, and it is a name here. It means spokesman, revelatory thought, but revealer or spokesman, and the one who speaks. And the Word was with God. Now the Word was one person. He was the spokesman, and he was with God, and God is another person. The same was in the beginning with God. Now there you have two persons. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now you read over in verse 14 of this same chapter that the Word, and this was much later, maybe millions or billions of years, we don't know, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And John bare witness of him, and we come on down to see that that's speaking of Jesus Christ. The Word is one who, maybe millions of years after the time spoken of in the first verse here, became Jesus Christ and was born as a human being, as a little baby, and grew up from babyhood. And it says, dwelt among us, and had taken on the likeness of humanity and of flesh and blood, and for the purpose of death. Because we can die, and he came down and became a man and called himself the Son of Man, but he was also the Son of God. He was born of a human woman, but he was fathered by the divine Almighty God. Now, God and the Word, primarily or originally, before everything else, were alone in space. I can't say in the universe because there wasn't any universe yet. In Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 9, you will read that God has created all things by Jesus Christ. And now we turn to Genesis 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens, and that is plural as Moses wrote it in the original Hebrew language, and in most translations into English, and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I have reason to believe, and I believe it just as if God had revealed it, that he created the entire physical creation at the same time he created this earth. If you notice in the 2nd chapter of Genesis and verse 4, it says, these are the generations of the heavens, plural, heavens, and of the earth, when they, see, all the vast universe, including the earth, were created in the day that the eternal God made the earth and the heavens. So apparently in the same day, whatever length day that is, but he's been speaking of days in Genesis. We don't have any trouble proving to you, unless you want to speculate and have a lot of theories and believe your theory and will not believe plain proofs and plain language, that the days, the 7 days in Genesis 1 are 7 literal 24-hour days. And each day is from sunset to sunset, the way God calculates time. And so in the same day. Now, there is the expression in the Bible elsewhere of days, the day of the Lord, and we're getting very close to that now. We've been for 6,000 years in the day of man, and that's a pretty long-lasting day. The day of man, it's been about 6,000 years. But anyway, in whatever space of time is indicated in that same day, he created the heavens, that's the whole universe, and the earth. Now, there is a point in how God creates. And science can't tell you this. And there is no church and no religion that will tell you, because they gloss over. And they have access to the same book where you can get this knowledge. And it's all here. But they have glossed over it all these years and centuries. And you will never hear it from any religious denomination. The method of God in creating. God creates by a principle of duality. There is a first stage of creation, but it isn't complete. Then there is a second phase that completes the creation. And now we come to the creation of man. And how does God create man? He's creating man to reproduce himself. And the first is the physical phase, and that began with the physical Adam. And you read of him back in the 26th verse of the first chapter of Genesis, and in Genesis 2 and 3. And Adam started off wrong. Adam had the chance to resist the way the angels had been going and to accept God's kingdom, God's government. God talked to Adam and explained. Adam knew it was his own maker, his own creator talking to him. He had no excuse at all. He didn't let Satan get near him until after God had given him all the real knowledge. But also, God intended that Adam must reject Satan's way as well as accept his in order to qualify. And he could have replaced this Lucifer, who became Satan. Lucifer, who was once created as a perfect archangel, perfect in all of his ways from the day he was created. You read in Ezekiel 28, but he came to be Satan the devil. And that was all his own doing, because the character, as I say, God can't build that alone. You have everything to do yourself, primarily to do with the building of your own character. Now, you alone can't do it either. You have to have God's help. But God will give you the help if you want to do it. That's why you were put on earth. The purpose of angel life was to build that character. The purpose of human life is to build that kind of holy and righteous character, and that is simply going the way of the law of God, and the law of God is the foundation and the basis of the government of God, and because of what the angels had done, the government of God was removed from this earth. And so the government of God is not on earth. God said to Adam, you have rejected me, you have turned down my way, you have decided to go the way that Satan went, to destroy instead of to build. So therefore, you've made the decision, and you've made it for your posterity, and the whole world that will be born from you. And God sentenced all humanity for 6,000 years. That is, the children of Adam and Eve, to being cut off from God, and said, you don't want me, you don't want my knowledge, you don't believe when I say what I say. People say, I believe in God. And I say, but you don't believe God, do you? Well, they don't quite get it, what I mean. You don't believe God? Well, you have to know what God says before you know whether you believe it or not. Adam and Eve believed in God. They knew that God was their maker. Wasn't any question about that. In the New Testament, they believed, many of them believed in Christ. There were the Jews you read of in the, the 8th chapter of John, beginning with verse 30, the Jews that believed on Jesus, and to those Jews that believed on him, he said, if you read through a good many verses there, you seek to kill me and put me to death because you don't believe what I say. My word has no place in you. You don't believe my word. Yet they claim to believe on him. Today they say, just believe on Christ. Oh yes, millions do. But Jesus said, in vain do they worship me. Teaching for doctrines the ideas and every commandments of men, and making the law of God of none effect by your human traditions. And that's what's going on all over this world.
Herbert W. Armstrong will return right after this message.
There's a reason for all of the troubles we're having in this world, let me tell you, my friends. And we don't have to have it. We're bringing suffering on ourselves. And the trouble is, you bring suffering on others along with your own self, and you'll suffer, every one of you, from what others are doing that you didn't even bring on yourself. Now, you don't hear anything of the government of God in any religion that I know anything about. But let me tell you, the one church that originates from this campus where I sit right now not only believes in the government of God, but it is administered. But it's a voluntary government, and it's only administered over those who voluntarily come and put themselves under it and to accept it. There's no force or duress of any kind in it. But the government of God is based on the law of God. But you see, the churches that call themselves Christian, the main tenet, if there's any, that is a tenet, the belief that they have is that God's law is done away. That God, that Christ came to abolish the law. And a lot of people believe that God of the Old Testament is a harsh, stern God, but Christ was a loving God, and he came to do away with that law of God and to let us do any old thing we please and bring curses and troubles and everything on ourselves. Well, we're sure doing it. But now he put humans on earth to build that character, and we have the chance, just as the angels did, but we're not doing it. We're going the same way they did. And but I said a while ago that God pronounced this sentence of being cut off from him for 6,000 years. Now that 6,000 years is just about up. It's going to end in our present living generation. And I would guess that 2/3 to 3/4 of all of you people listening to me now are going to live through this time, when this present world is going to be over. That doesn't mean the destruction of the earth. The world is one thing and the earth is something else. The earth is the planet we live on. The world is the system of society that man has built on that planet. And that system of society is rotten. It's filthy. It's damnable. And it's going to go. And so we're told to pray, thy kingdom come, God's kingdom, God's government, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And not until then will we have any peace, any hope, or any truth on earth. Well, now let me just say finally, the book that I am now completing, I have not decided yet on the exact name of it, but it will have to do with the religious confusion in the world. And it will give you 7 major truths which really put to shame such confusion as we have in this world, in a Babylon of religious ideas. And if you get together, no two people can agree. If you're going to have truth in a church, and to the Corinthian church, the Apostle Paul was inspired to write that you must all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, no schism in the body. Well, there's only one way that can be. Because you can't get a group of people, and if they vote on what they want to believe and what they don't want to believe, they're not going to agree. There's only one case in the Bible, only one case and one illustration, where there was a council and they came together to decide a doctrinal matter. And that's in the 15th chapter of the book of Acts. There were probably only 3 or 4 of the apostles there, but there was Paul and Barnabas, so that would have made it very least, at least 5 of the apostles and other elders, and there was much disputing and much wrangling until Peter stood up, who did have primacy, and he laid down the law of what it was and gave the decision. Then James, who was the pastor of the local church, and for that reason was acting as what we would call today the chairman of the meeting, a matter of diplomacy, he just said, now Peter has spoken, and so we just make this official, what Peter has said. You'll find that everything that was believed in the original church had come from one source, not what the people believed, not what ministers wanted to get together and decide among themselves what we think ought to be the true doctrine. It all came from Christ, and Christ got it to the church through the apostles that he had chosen, and in no other way. Now, I'll just give you $1,000 if you'll show me where it ever got into the church of God in Bible times any other way. Because it just didn't. And as long as men are going to decide, and ministers want to get together and decide on what to believe and what not to believe, you're going to have confusion of tongues. That's why we have it in the world today. The truth must come from God. He's the author of truth. And Christ is the spokesman of God and the Word. And it must come from there. And if he chose the apostles, they didn't choose him. They didn't choose themselves. Jesus said to his apostles, he said, you have not called me or chosen me, but I have chosen you. You see, Peter wanted to be a fisherman, and Andrew his brother. And one of them wanted to be a tax collector. And but Jesus said, no, you come and follow me. I've called you into my mission. And so they followed him, and they got their teaching directly from him. Now, the Apostle Paul, he spent 3 years with Christ in Arabia. He said, I have seen Christ. I have been with Christ. He got it, and he went to Jerusalem to be sure that what he was preaching was exactly the same as they were preaching, that there wouldn't be any division. And he found that what he had gotten from Christ was precisely the same thing that Peter and James and John and those other apostles at Jerusalem, as they were at that time, had also received from the same head of the church, who is Christ. That's where it must come from. And if it comes in any other way, you're going to have confusion, and you're going to have trouble, and you're going to get into the same trouble that will damn the church as the whole world has damned itself by the way they have done, and the suffering and the sorrow and everything that we have in this world. So I hope that here we'll come out of all of that and come into the way that God will show us. And I'll tell you, an apostle of God always keeps the door open. And if someone thinks he's human, and if he's made a mistake, someone can come to him, and his mind will be open enough that if you are right and he's wrong, he'll find it and make the change. You know, if anyone would never, if he can't ever change when he's wrong, he can never really be right. I haven't had to change very many times, but I have, when I've had to, I have done it. And I would do it again. And that's the only way you can be sure. You've got to be in the hands of God. And so that, you see, we're only the clay and he's the master potter. We've got to let him form and shape us his way. You've got to let him give us his doctrines, his beliefs, his teaching of what we ought to do, what we ought to believe. And any other way, you're going into the confusion of tongues and the religious confusion that is now engulfing this world. Well, I hope this book will be out by next spring, and I hope that I'll be mentioning it on this program on television, and also it'll be announced in many ways, and it'll be in bookstores everywhere. So until next time, this is Herbert W. Armstrong saying goodbye, friends.
Okay, brethren, and we're going to have either this morning another sermon by Mr. Armstrong, or we're going to come back this afternoon. Let's take a break and sing a hymn together first, and then we'll figure out where we're going after this one. Let's sing this hymn from Psalm 111, entitled "Wisdom Begins with the Fear of the Lord." Praise you, the Lord, with your whole heart give praise. Where the upright are a symbol to God, his glorious works shall forever endure, worthy of honor and praise. There is no end unto his righteousness, great works of wonder he makes, that we may know the eternal is good, full of compassion and grace. Verse 2, everybody. For those who fear him, our God will provide. Ever his covenant he will not forget. He showed his people the power of his works, lands of the heathen to gain. Judgment and truth are the works of his hands. All his commandments are sure. They are all done in uprightness and truth. They shall forever endure. Verse 3, unto his people redemption he sent. God has commanded his covenant always. Steadfast and sure it forever will stand. Holy and reverend his name. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. God's praise endureth for aye. His laws impart understanding and grace to those who heed and obey. Brethren, thank you again to those of you who sang along on the second hymn today. That one was a piano hymn only, so I tried to be right with the music, or just slightly ahead of it, so that you could sing along with it without any problem, I hope. Now, for the other sermon that I have for us for Mr. Armstrong, I'm going to have to load it where this first sermon was. That'll just take me a moment. Let's see if we can do that real quickly here. And if we have any problem with that, there's plenty of things I can tell you this morning, and we could come back this afternoon after we take a little break. But let me see what I can do and see how long this sermon is. Okay, I think I have it right here. Yeah, okay, so it's loading up. Let's see if it loads okay. All right, I do have it loaded, and whether we play it this morning or later, let's see. Actually, I got to cue this up. All right, let's go through a few things. I think what I'm going to do is finish up just a little early this morning, a little bit early, and take a break. And we'll come back in just a couple of hours. Hopefully, it'll still be Sabbath in the United Kingdom and maybe a little bit in Israel. And cover a few things that this day, as we finish, especially this year, as we finish up a week tonight at sunset, that finishes off the first week of 7 weeks that we count toward Pentecost. that began during this week of unleavened bread at the beginning of the week, the very first day of the first week. This week and this year was the first day of unleavened bread. And it was also, it's not always this way. And in fact, it's only this way that the Wave Sheaf Day and the first day of unleavened bread are the same day in a year when Passover is on a weekly Sabbath, as Passover was this year, 2025, on a weekly Sabbath, exactly 1 week ago from today. And so the Wave Sheaf Day began on the first day of the week, Sunday, the 13th day of April. And that first week ends tonight at sunset, at the end of the last day of unleavened bread. 1 week of the 7 weeks that we count toward Pentecost will have been complete. Now if you can see the lettering, okay. Let me do this. Let's just go into the Hebrew to the Roman calendar for a moment. And you can see at the end of this week starts over here on the left side where you see 13. April 13 was the date for the first day of this week. That ends on the 19th day of April at the end of this week. And just over to the right side of your screen where you see the 19 for today's date on the Roman calendar, April 19, you see a number 7 off in the margin. Well, that means that 7 days of the 49 days of the 7-week count will be complete tonight at sunset. Now, in the week below that, after April 26th, 1 week from today, over in the right-hand margin, you see a number 14. And that means that at the end of next week, 14 days of the 49 that we count of the 7 weeks that must be complete before we number the morrow after the 7th Sabbath as number 50, Pentecost. That 14 over there on the end of the second week means 14 days or 2 weeks of the 7 weeks have been complete. And so I do that on my pocket calendar for the whole period of the 7 weeks that we have to count. Let's zoom out, and you can see during the month of May. I don't have a tight shot on this pre-program, but at the end of the month of May, you can see 21, 28, 35, 42, 49 in the right-hand margin. And that 49 is at the end of the 7 weeks, meaning 7 weeks or 49 days have been complete. And then we look over to the next day. The morrow after the 7th Sabbath is June 1st this year. That's day number 50 of the count that we count to Pentecost, and numbering the day of Pentecost as day number 50. Even the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number as number 50, 50 days. And then you do the holy day. You offer the offering, you don't work that day, you have a commanded assembly. That occurs this year on June 1st. So there's how we count that. And of course, this year is an unusual year in the sense that only 10% of the time in a 19-year time cycle will Passover occur on a weekly Sabbath. Now that's a generic, general reference. It could be 11 or 12%. I acknowledge that. But it's going to be down close to 10%. Some years maybe 9%, some years 11%, some years maybe 12%. But pretty generally speaking, Passover only occurs on a Sabbath day, as it is occurring this year, about, I didn't say exactly now, so don't misquote me, but it occurs about 10% of the time of a 19-year time cycle. The other 90% of the 19-year time cycle, Passover will occur on only one of 3 other possible days. That's on the 2nd, the 4th, or the 6th day of the week, or in other words, a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Passover cannot occur on what days? Now, if Passover can occur on a 2nd day, a 4th day, a 6th day, or a 7th day, or in other words, Passover can occur on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Sabbath day, brethren, then what days will the Sabbath not occur on in any year? or, not only will not occur, but cannot occur on the other days, the way God's got it worked out. Well, I've got it on a chart here for you. Well, I've got the days it can occur on, but if you just eliminate the other days, Passover, the S stands for Sabbath, by the way. So Passover cannot occur on a Sunday, on a Tuesday, or a Thursday, ever, according to the way God has set the rules for his holy sacred calendar, the Hebrew calendar. Now, why is that important for you to know that, brethren? You might just want to say, well, just tell me what day is Pentecost, tell me what day is Passover and the days of unleavened bread. Well, that's because, are we not told in Scripture that we are to prove all things? And is that instruction only to the ministry, or, brethren, is that instruction to you as well? I'll tell you what, let's put that up on the screen. Where do you find that? I think you find that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 21. So if you want to go there in your own Bible while I punch this up, I'll tell you again as I punch it where we're going. We're going to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 21. I think I've got that abbreviation correct. Yeah, and I've got it on my Bible display, so let's just put the Bible display up on the screen where you can see it with me. And let's read this together. Does it not say, you don't have to prove all things? No, it says, prove all things. And brethren, this is instruction to each one of us, not just the ministry, to every single one of us. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21. So for you right now, even as a lay member of the church, you have this instruction upon you that you must prove all things. But more than that, since you, as a member of God's church, are presently in training, are you not, to become a king and a priest in God's coming government. And so not only do you prove this for yourself, but you prove it so that you will be able to teach others and show them how it works. Now, if you understand what I put together in this chart for you, if you understand that in a year when Passover occurs on the Sabbath, like it's occurring this year, then in this first column, after the titles on the left side, the very first column after the titles, where it says when Passover is or equals or is the Sabbath day, then go down to the next row where the title says W Sabbath means weekly Sabbath. I didn't have room to type all of it, so I'll put weekly Sabbath. W Sabbath for weekly Sabbath is going to be the 14th day of the first month in a year when the Passover occurs on a Sabbath. That Sabbath, that weekly Sabbath, is the 14th day of the first month, the same as the date given in Leviticus 23 for Passover. That also means something unusual that doesn't happen in any other year except in a year when Passover occurs on the Sabbath. The wave sheaf day will then be the 15th day of the first month. And as you know, the 15th day of the first month is also the first day of unleavened bread. And even though we don't have a title or a label for the first day of unleavened bread, and I don't for a specific reason, the first day of unleavened bread, is always the 15th day of the first month. Well, here in the first column, and the row that says the wave sheaf day, the 15th day of the first month is lining up, the first day of unleavened bread on the 15th is lining up with the wave sheaf day. And in that year, when Passover occurs on a weekly Sabbath, the very next day is the wave sheaf day. The very next day by the calendar is also the first day of unleavened bread. So only in the year when Passover occurs on the Sabbath, as it does today, is the wave sheaf day and the first day of unleavened bread the same day as it was on the first day of this week. Now, did I go too fast for you? If I did, or if it seemed too fast for you, that's why I have this chart here. I'm going to leave it up for a minute or two so that if you know how to take a screenshot, You can do that either on your phone or especially easily on a laptop or a desktop computer. Just take a screenshot. Now, on your phone, there are different ways to do it. You take a screenshot of your phone. It depends on whether you're using an iPhone or an Android phone. But on an iPhone, you can go, well, you hold in two buttons. You hold in your on-off button at the same time you hold the volume up button. And you press them together and poof, that takes a screenshot for you. And so I recommend that you do that to study this later, or you can send me an email, get our address from the Contact Us page on our website at COGTV. You can get to our website by typing Sabbath.tv, and our email address is on the contact page. Just send me an email and say, Stephen, will you send me that Passover Pentecost chart with the dates and days of Passover and Pentecost? And yes, I will. I'll be happy to do it. The purpose for which I made this chart, not only to analyze a number of things, but was primarily to prove out that Pentecost could only occur on one of four certain definite dates on the Hebrew calendar in the third month. Pentecost will only occur either on the 5th day of the third month, the 6th day of the third month, the 8th day of the third month, or the 10th day of the first month. Now, if you're a person who is curious about this crazy religion that some of us have, that is different from mainstream Christianity, and of course different from every other religion that is not mainstream Christianity, every other religion of the world that's not mainstream Christianity, that is, which God has only called a few to be able to understand. Now, if he's in the process of calling you, for whatever purpose that calling may be, because God decides he's heard your name in prayer and says, yeah, this person can make it, I can use them in the predetermined small number of people whom I've decided to choose out to be part of the spring harvest. And brethren, that includes some of you who grew up in the church, who for a long time you decided to ignore what you heard in the weekly Sabbath services. That was the religion of your mom and dad. And for a while, you went your own way. And some of you who probably are not listening have decided to continue to go your own way. Others of you, and more likely among those who grew up in the church who are listening here, you made an election, a wonderful, beneficial, great blessing decision, the election, to tell God, I want to be part of this first resurrection. I want to be part of your spring harvest. And, brethren, even though we're in the sixth era, the Philadelphia era of God's church right now. Yeah, I know some of you that are maybe tuned in for the first time, or you're listening over here, listening over there. You say, well, wait a minute. I heard this minister who claims to have followed from God's church under Mr. Armstrong say that we're now in the Laodicean seventh era of God's church. Well, where are those people that are saying that getting that? Well, they're getting it from one another, and they love to encourage one another in this because it gives them an excuse for having created their own egotistical vanity plate, banana peeling named this or that Church of God group. That's what gives them the excuse for doing what they've done in that, which is a source of dividing God's church while we're scattered, unfortunately, and causing confusion among people of the world. And it also, unknowingly to many people, confuses a lot of God's brethren, because instead of recognizing and realizing that we are now scattered, as the logo that we put up at the beginning and ending of our Sabbath services here, as it says, we are the Church of God scattered worldwide. Scattered abroad, scattered worldwide. That is the condition that we are in today. And if you're in one of those vanity, if you're attending and consider yourself, whether you consider yourself a member of one of the vanity plate, blankety blank, banana peeling, named this or that Church of God groups, it causes confusion among the brethren. It causes you to either overlook or ignore the fact that God has allowed his church to become scattered. We do not have one pastor general now over the entire church. And we do not have a living apostle. We could have had one. God told the man that he appointed to be the new pastor general that if you prove by your works to God that you are performing the works of an apostle, then God, who it has to be who gives you the title, not Mr. Armstrong said, not me. I can't give you that title. Only God can give you that title, and he'll only give you that title according to your works. That's what the man who he appointed the new pastor general was instructed and told. And so he said, go do the works that will cause God to give you the title of apostle. You'll earn it. But no, he didn't want to earn it. He just wanted to be given that title. He wanted that title so badly that he made himself an apostle. He made himself an apostle, all right, but unfortunately, it was not an apostle of God, not a true apostle of God. He made himself, as many of you know and see from the works, a false apostle who led the way with a great apostasy, which needed to be. All right, now why, brethren, would I say that needed to be? Now, did we finish the subject where I was talking about we need to prove all things? All right, if another thought comes to mind on that a little later, we'll come back to that. But I want to take us to that scripture that relates to what I was just saying about, apostle. God has to give the title of apostle. And if you try to take it to yourself, you make yourself a false apostle. And God, one reason he allowed the false apostle to carry on for some time as he did was to do what God says must be done in 1 Corinthians 11:19. Now, what does it say there? Let's go over there and have a look together. If you're going to turn in your own Bible, we're going to 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians, we're going to chapter 19. And in chapter 19, we're going, let's see, I got ahead of myself. In chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, we're going to verse 19. Let's read that together. I have it on the screen for you. And as the apostasy got underway, there was an elder in God's church. He wasn't then a minister. He was made a minister later. During the time of the apostasy, he was made a minister by a ministry that the church had commissioned and ordained into the church from an area of South Africa known as, it starts with an A. Can I think of the title of that area? Angola. Some of the ministry there ordained this elder who, during the time of a lot of head-scratching confusion as the apostasy was getting underway and growing by leaps and bounds and fulfilling what Mr. Armstrong said as he sat behind his desk on stage several Sabbaths and said, "Brethren, half of you aren't getting it." And then up the number to 90%. 90% of you are not getting it. And that shocked me when I heard him say 90%, to the point where, after having heard him for many Sabbaths say, "Brethren, half of you aren't getting it." And that was causing me concern. Half of us aren't getting it? Am I in that half? What half? And then he says, 90% of you aren't getting it. I heard that, but I couldn't believe my ears. So I asked a lot of the brethren at headquarters, that after that Sabbath, I said, "Hey, did you hear Mr. Armstrong say what I think I heard him say? Did he set up the ante today from half of us, 50% of us aren't getting it, to 90%? And excuse me, and several of the brethren I asked said, "Yes, Stephen, that's what I heard. I heard him say 90% of us aren't getting it." And I like shook my head. I said, Mr. Armstrong, where are you getting this 90% from? That's way more than half of us. That's almost all of us. And I just couldn't believe. I thought, well, pardon me if I say this, but I was thinking, like, Mr. Armstrong, are you going wacko on us here or what? Well, then to make, as you prove all things, to prove the fact of what Mr. Armstrong said, it almost took Mr. Armstrong's death to do it for some of us to believe and understand that, as we saw the new pastor general and his son, excuse me, lead the way with an apostasy that showed, as this verse 19 of 1 Corinthians 11 is giving us an understanding on. And this is the verse that the elder I'm mentioning to you, who was the head of the, what language was that? That Spanish type language that's called, starts with a P, Portuguese. This elder was in charge of the Portuguese department that would translate the monthly Plain Truth magazine and certain booklets and articles from the monthly Plain Truth magazine. He would translate those into the Portuguese language for our Portuguese-speaking brethren. And we had a lot of Portuguese-speaking brethren, including that large group under a ministry that the church brought into God's church, ordained into God's church, back in the late 70s or early 80s. And then when the apostasy came along, it would have been in the early mid-80s that this happened. And then when the Angola ministry was brought into God's church, and then when the apostasy came along after Mr. Armstrong's death, that ministry ordained the head of the Portuguese language department of the God's church as a minister in God's church. He would go over there during the Feast of Tabernacles each year and conduct services for them at their invitation. And then they ordained him during one of those Feast of Tabernacles. But he's the one that brought some peace of mind to a lot of us that were scratching our heads, as so many around us, including ministers, were going along with the apostasy. And we began to see that, man, incredible as it is, Mr. Armstrong was right that about 90% of those amidst us in the Church of God weren't getting it. Because roughly, just generically, roughly speaking, is it not true, brethren, that about half of those who were fellowshipping among us, roughly, could be more, could be a little less, exactly, I don't know the exact numbers, but you can just know from what you saw that about half of the brethren went along hook, line, sinker, full bore with the apostasy. They went along with it and became part of it and espoused it. Even some ministers. I had one minister that, even though he came to college in years after I came, he was one of those very eloquent speaking type people. Just real eloquence about him, just a fascinating charm about him. I don't have that. I may be able to speak reasonably well, but I don't have that eloquent, charming, ability that some people have that attracts people. Maybe attracts some of you women, men that are not in God's church. They're attractive because they've got this Hollywood style eloquence about them. Alan, you know what I'm talking about. You know those type. You see them among yourself, and you find them charming, but at the same time maybe deplorable because they don't have a real genuineness about them. And eventually, some people see that, but do they not? Maybe it takes a long time. But we had some of that among God's church, and some of those ministers, one of them in particular, came up to me. He could see out in the lobby after services, after these apostates would speak, he could see it on my face that I was troubled. So he came up to me and say, "Hey, Stephen, I can see you're troubled by this. I know where you are. I was like that a few weeks ago, a few months ago, whatever." He said, "Just hang in there. After a little while,